Rapper Denzel Curry's critically acclaimed 2018 release, Taboo, explores a number of different themes, arranged into 3 separate acts. The project takes the listener through a number of narratives that take a powerful stance on issues that have touched Curry's life and career. Nora Lewis writes, Taboo is a candid chronicle of talented Black artists being plucked from obscurity and thrust into the music industry with very little creative freedom. What remains most frightening about Curry's journey is not the gothic clown imagery or graphic violence, but his entrapment in the racist cycle of young artists forced to exchange their well-being for supposed wealth and clout. Curry isn't nearly the first artist that has had a bone to pick with the music industry. In 1993, Prince changed his name to a symbol, later also going by the artist formerly known as Prince, in order to protest his deal with Warner Music Group. In 2015, Prince likened the music industry to slavery. In 1998, Left Eye's openness about TLC's bankruptcy and experience with small royalty percentages worked to change the mainstream conversation about labels.
Okay, $300,000. I can buy a nice house with that. And what am I gonna pay my bills with?
In 2015, Megan Thee Stallion sued 1501 Certified Entertainment for breach of contract, negligent misrepresentation, and a list of other alleged crimes. In 2020, Ye, or Kanye West, posted his Universal Music Group contract to Twitter and, just like Prince, compared the music industry to modern-day slavery. Chance the Rapper's status as an independent artist has been contested, and industry plant accusations have been thrown around. But it can't be denied that Chance helped cultivate an entire generation of artists that saw independence as a viable way to break into the mainstream media. If Chance is an industry plant, then the music industry only wounded itself, because now indie artists have more power than ever. As artists and their audience develop their own standards for music, they push themselves further and further from the industry and the values that the industry holds. For several years, the industry hasn't had a good grasp on the desires of artists and audiences.
This is Patrick, Carnell, Kelly, and Dustin.
Just over 20 years ago in St. Petersburg, Florida, 4 boys and their cousins made a promise to their mother to follow their dreams. They found themselves working 10 to 12 hours a day, staying in the studio until 3 a.m. and traveling for different performances and competitions, the youngest of them being around 8 or 9 years old. Around the year 2000, they were signed and taken through the whirlwind that is the music industry. Between 2000 and 2007, the Breeding Boys, known professionally as B5, were everywhere. But in 2020, B5's youngest member made it clear that their silence was not indicative of their satisfaction with their time in the industry thus far. The truth was the exact opposite. To put it plainly, B5 was never meant to succeed. No artist is.
Welcome to the case study.
First, let's rewind to the 90s.
Hi, my name is Dustin. I'm one of the members of the group This and That. I'm 12 years old.
I'm Kelly. I'm one of the members of the group This and That. I'm 11 years old. My name is Patrick, and I'm one of the members of the group This and That. I'm 9 years old. My name is Carnell. I'm the member of the group This and That.
Around 1998, the 4 oldest members formed the group This and That. Brian was around 5 at the time, and he was in his own group called the Oreos. Early on, the older 4 changed their name from This and That to the TNT Boys and began their tireless work. They performed in schools, at festivals. There was no such thing as a bad gig for this group.
TNT Boys when I was like around 10 or 11 years old, so Dustin was like 12.
We just did everything we could. We didn't turn down anything. It was like, man.
To put this in perspective, when I was 12 years old, I was getting in trouble for writing down Lupe Fiasco lyrics. When I was 8 years old, I had just learned that the moon rotates in addition to revolving. They were doing, grown-up stuff at this age. Based on other clips from these documentaries that I have, it looked like they had a lot of fun in addition to all the work that they were doing. I'm just giving you all the facts. You can still find songs that the group created around this time, and while they sound exactly like songs that children would sing, they're not bad, at all.
I can't believe that I fell for you after 2 days of knowing you. Should've known that I was only passing. passing through. I meet girls like all the time. Shouldn't just have one on my mind. Trying to come up, I'm on a climb.
They sound like songs on the radio around that time, like Cold B2K or that Belle Biv DeVoe album from 2001. After winning their first Radio Disney competition and scoring tickets to see the Backstreet Boys, the TNT Boys saw the opportunity to take all future Radio Disney competitions by storm.
That was our very first competition that we ever did, and probably like the very first time we were ever performing on stage.
It was crazy. We went up there, we had drawn mustaches on and sideburns, and I was AJ, and Dustin was Nick, and Kelly was Allie, and everybody.
All the other kids were just, plain, boring, all that stuff. But, we were just, we were just going all out. We were just trying to have a lot of fun with it.
They won every competition and became official Radio Disney dancers. When they added Brian to the group, they changed their name to B5 and met Sean Combs. On April 18th, 2021, Diddy wrote an article called "If You Love Us, Pay Us" for his Revolt TV online publication. The article was an open letter to corporate America, but primarily General Motors, and demanded equal pay for Black employees. In his attempt to free working Americans from the racist chains of capitalism, Diddy didn't take into account the people he hasn't adequately paid over the years. Unsurprisingly, he received a lot of backlash from followers and even former artists. Mace, the rapper turned preacher previously signed to Bad Boy, replied in a statement that also went viral. Mace and other artists like Dream, Day 26, Diddy Kane, Young Jock, and The Lox have been said to be victims of the Bad Boy curse, the moniker given to the string of tragedies that happened to artists after they signed with Bad Boy. Many of these tragedies Diddy has never addressed in public. B5 is also said to have been affected by the Bad Boy curse, but more on that later. B5 had done a lot of their own artist growth and development prior to signing to Bad Boy around 2001. They learned acrobatics from one of their cousins. Carnell and Patrick handled choreography, and they sounded like this prior to their first single. But this was only a part of the work and preparation they'd have to do before their debut album. First, the name change definitely had a positive impact. It also resembled the Jackson 5's name and album artwork on a couple of compilation albums, banking a bit on that resemblance. B5 naturally fit into the mold set by the Jackson 5 and the Temptations that groups like Menudo, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, New Edition, DeBarge, and New Kids on the Block used in order to be successful. Have 5 singers, with at least 2 of them being able to carry lead vocals, and all being able to harmonize. Around 2005, they were ready to begin releasing new music with their new label. Ages 11 to 17, they were marketed as a family-friendly urban boy band. They began to work with choreographers, they were styled by professionals and no longer wore outfits handmade by their mother, and Carnell was referred to as a brother and not a cousin. All of these decisions went into crafting B5's image. They quickly became known as a group of 5 brothers that made clean, hip-hop inspired R&B. Their single, All I Do, is a song originated by the Jackson 5 and previously covered by Troop.
I can't wait to get to school each day and wait for you to pass my way. I can't wait to get to school each day and wait for you to pass my way. I can't wait to get to school each day and wait for you to pass my way.
This track is supposed to make you nostalgic, even if you've never seen this group before. The B5 album was released on July 19th, 2005, and there were a lot of movers and shakers involved in its creation. Carrie Hilson, Sean Garrett, Stevie J, Darkchild, Ryan Leslie, Sierra, the Corner Boys, and of course P. Diddy all had a hand in its creation. The songs on the project were all hip-hop inspired but radio-friendly. It was a pretty well-rounded release, making it clear that B5 can sing on slower tracks, dance tracks, and a cappella tracks. songs. There are some songs that were weaker than others, but the album is solid considering the group's age and the age of their target audience. Considering that this album dropped in the middle of the bling rap era and the more playful R&B era that was the early 2000s, the project was right where it needed to be. The album reached number 7 on the top R&B hip-hop chart after entering at 19 in its first week of release on the Billboard 200 and 11 on the Billboard Top R&B and Hip Hop Album chart. The debut album peaked at number 9 on Radio Disney and hung on the BET 106 and Park Top 10 for weeks. This was the peak of B5's career. They made an appearance in Sierra's 1-2-step video. They have a Get Your Head in the Game cover that was included on the High School Musical soundtrack. They recorded Siamese Cat song, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, and Someday at Christmas for Disney, and worked with Robert Townsend on a Christmas special for Disney. Here's a list of associated acts, events, and programs that B5 were involved with around this time. In November of 2005, B5 were rushed at a Radio Disney show at the Brookdale Mall in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In the rush, they had jewelry and clothing stolen off of their bodies.
They're kissing me to death. I'm almost passed out. I couldn't breathe because there's so many closed in on.
Even fans were caught in the crossfire. For such a young group, they had an incredible amount of star power. B5 were on top of the world. Though they didn't have a number 1 album, they were nothing short of successful. B5's second album, Don't Talk, Just Listen, was definitely a more mature release. Dustin was around 20, Kelly 19, Patrick 17, Carnell 17, and Brian 14. It was essentially B5's heartbreak album. When you look back at videos and photos from this stage in their career, you can see that they were really leaning into a more urban image. It remained clean cut, but not as sterile as their image was with the first album. The entire album, I'm pretty sure, is also an homage to Jodeci.
Don't talk, just listen. Don't talk, just listen.
Don't Talk, Just Listen had an a cappella cover of Joe's No One Else.
When we turn out the lights, the two of us alone together.
When we turn out the lights, the two of us alone together.
Hearing the a cappella cover of the Beatles' Let It Be from the first album.
Speaking words of wisdom, let it be.
Speaking words of wisdom, let it be, let it be.
Like the first album, there was something for everyone. The album spawned 2 singles, Hydraulics featuring Bow Wow, and In My Bedroom.
Never been known as a player, but ain't nobody gon' say it. But we ain't even got to go there now. You were so contagious.
Hydraulics was a high-energy hip-hop influenced single, and In My Bedroom was more R&B inspired. These tracks reached numbers 36 and 55 on the R&B and hip-hop chart respectively. This album reached number 27 on the Billboard 200. I'll also personally chime in and say that What It Do off of this album is a banger. It's like my favorite song ever.
Never seen you around here before. Girl, you're so hard to ignore. Just how you look into me, baby, what it do?
Charting information for this album is limited, but it sold 19,000 copies in the first week of its release. B5 is not the first group to hit the sophomore slump. It's common to see a dip in sales and attention at an artist's second album, and unfortunately, they aren't the first to not fully recover from the whiplash. According to an interview Carnell recently did with The Only Jersey, they were in negotiations for a series with Disney at this time, but they also realized that they were not pleased with their Bad Boy contract around this time as well. Here's something interesting I found, and I just want to show it to you. Kelly, Carnell, and Patrick are credited as composers on this second album. What a composer does can differ by track, project, and I even think like label or genre, but it generally refers to creating the melody or composing for or writing for the melody of a track. So it's safe to say that these 3 were involved in making the tracks, right? At least on one of the tracks, right? The other 2 are only credited as members of the main ensemble, while these 3 are credited as composers. Remember this, because it will be important later. Soon after the album's release, the group disappeared from the mainstream spotlight. Around 2009, they were finally released from their Bad Boy deal after a 2-year hiatus. Unfortunately, this was the final album B5 would release for the foreseeable future, aside from this mixtape, which was released on Dat Piff. Around 2010, B5 landed a deal with Upfront Megatainment, a recording and artist development label headed by Divine Stevens, the executive that helped develop artists like Akon, T-Pain, and Usher. Around this time, they also began rebranding in order to relaunch their career. This is not atypical. It's pretty standard for an artist or group to reinvent themselves, especially after a long hiatus. However, it was almost like B5 completely changed genres. In addition to donning an entirely new style, some of their music was electro-pop or club pop inspired. Previously, their music put an emphasis on their singing, but this style did nothing to emphasize the vocals and harmonies that were so impressive before.
I can't believe that I fell for you after 2 days of knowing you. Should've known that I was only.
Should've let you win. I was on the grind, do my thing. You never know what you got till it's gone. Woo, woo. You gotta like that. You gotta like that. Electronic, I'm your man. I'm gonna make you understand. You gotta like that. You gotta like that. Electronic, I'm your man. I'm gonna make you. Throw your hands up. I wanna hold you, hold you.
Along with their new image came a new name, Audio. Their first single, Magnetic, was an upbeat track with an Akon feature.
See, you know I've been looking for you, baby, 'cause we don't have the energy lately. Some beat that's what it sounds like when I talk to you.
It was different from what fans were used to, but it was only the beginning of B5 songs in this genre. The video for Magnetic is pretty ambitious in its conception, and though it doesn't completely nail it, it gets the job done. Unfortunately, the track wasn't as successful as they'd hoped. Audio continued to record a number of songs, however, most songs leaked prior to the creation of a full-length project. In 2012, Audio performed Single, which was their second official release, at the Sweet Auburn Festival, a yearly music festival held in College Park.
Hey girl, yeah you, I can see you feel the same way too. It's your world, what you gon' do if I decide to pick you with you?
However, prior to shooting and releasing a music video, the group would go on yet another hiatus and emerge about a year later. This is something that every artist that starts out young and wants any sort of longevity has to go through. They have to figure out how to go from bubblegum pop and less mature subject matter to more mature subject matter, which most likely includes more explicit sexual references. That's just sort of the name of the game. This is why artists usually go through a huge rebranding when going from a minor artist to an artist that's over the age of 18. The artist also has to find a way to do this that resonates with the audience. This is difficult because as fans get older, their taste in music changes. So they may not be into the same groups, the same sounds, whatever that they were into prior. They may still have interest in the old classics for nostalgic purposes, but that doesn't mean that they'll automatically be into what the artist does next. For example, Johnny Gill, who in my opinion is one of the best singers ever, struggled time and time again to establish himself and resonate with fans as a solo act, despite the fact that he started out as a solo act. His duets album with Stacey Lettersaw, his time with New Edition, his time with LSG, his time with Heads of State, all of that stuff has overshadowed his solo career time and time again. Out of the 8 albums he's released since 1983, only about 3 of them were successful in terms of charting and sales. Not only did he have to rebrand himself between Super Love and the Chemistry album, but he also had to rebrand himself when going back and forth between New Edition and Johnny Gill as a solo act. This is something that B5 also has experienced, which I'll touch on in a little bit. In 1978, producer Kenneth Gamble founded the Black Music Association, or BMA, which sought to recognize and celebrate the economic and cultural power of Black music as well as those who made and promoted it. Though it faded from prominence, the advocacy effort has been seemingly reignited as the BAM, Black American Music Association. While still in operation, the original BMA's slogan was, "Black music is green." In 2013, B5 premiered their new single, Say Yes, to positive reviews and released a music video which paralleled their You Got Me video with its emphasis on black and white.
And I want you to say yeah, and I'm gonna say yeah, and I want you to say yeah, and I'm gonna say yeah.
They promoted the video on 106 & Park and released an acoustic version of the song on YouTube.
I want you to say yeah, and I'm gonna say yeah, I want you to say yeah, and I'm gonna say yeah, I want you to say yeah, yeah, I'm gonna say yeah, I'm gonna say yeah.
However, soon after this single was released, the group would go on another hiatus. Throughout the years, life went on for the group. Each member released their own solo music and worked separately on various projects, showing their own individual styles. With Kelly, Carnell, and Dustin.
I've done it a couple times before, but I wanted to make it a consistent thing, like some investigative journalism type stuff, even though I don't have the qualifications to do that.
I started a video on this group several times, so I already had a lot of information, plus all of this stuff that I own already. So I figured, why not start with this group? I really tried to dig up everything I could in order to make this as well-rounded as possible. So I hope it's been enjoyable for you as far, and I hope that I've done a good job at laying out the facts for you. And you made it here. I actually cut a lot out of this video for time and for entertainment value, but here's a list of everything that I cut out. If you're interested in documentary style videos like this, consider subscribing. It's free. A lot of you probably didn't even make it here, so that's cool too. Another reason why I started with this group B5, because there might only B5 of you that actually watch this video. Okay, let's get back into it. B5 came back with a bang in 2018 with their new single, Do That.
Sailor, you ain't gotta flex when you see me trying to cuff you. Let's get in trouble, don't you? Play love.
The song is more hip-hop inspired, as is Wave, which was released in 2019.
Ooh, yeah, sorry, let go when you come to the crib, we can ride, alright? Ooh, yeah, body so thick, make a nigga like me wanna call it that.
Though less R&B inspired, these two singles are probably their highest quality music yet. Along with Wave came the announcement of their upcoming EP, New Jacksons, which would be released on July 2nd, 2019. B5's latest Rebirth seemed to be right on time, after they pitched the Millennium Tour to B2K and came out for a performance in April 2019.
I can't wait to get this police and we put you to rest. Come on.
They began planning the hashtag TB tour with Immature, Ray J, J Holiday, and Day 26. This is the perfect idea. They had the perfect idea smack dab in the middle of the era of nostalgia. However, the tour never fully came to fruition. There was a successful tour date at the theater at Grand Prairie on December 14th, 2019, but dates prior to and after December 14th were slowly canceled. Most of the articles I could find about the hashtag TB tour are about drama with J Holiday and the show cancellations. In lieu of these tour dates, B5 held their own personal meet and greets on July 13th in Atlanta, August 16th in Pittsburgh, November 8th in New York City, and December 12th in Chicago. In an interview with Hollywood Life from 2019, they talk about how much they still admire Diddy and his opinion, saying about the hashtag TB tour, "Diddy didn't help us out with this project, but we see him every once in a while. Other than that, he taught us a lot in the game just by being around him. We learned a lot from him." At the beginning of July, the New Jacksons EP was officially postponed.
I have some kind of bittersweet news. If you haven't heard from one of my brothers or from the B5 online account, the New Jacksons B5 EP is going to get pushed back to a slightly further date. We started a new relationship with a better distribution company that's a better fit for us in our branding. but it kind of comes with the consequences of us adjusting the release date a little bit. So keep following us, and I'm sure we'll announce the new date shortly.
Later that month, on the 15th anniversary of the release of their debut album, Brian wrote an Instagram post that went viral. It said, "We made about 99% of all of our income from live performances and merchandise. Until this day, I've never seen a penny from any of our B5 commercial albums. For years, we reached out to lawyers, advisors, and even TV networks for a chance to help us tell our story, and no one ever touched it with a 10-foot pole. Write and own your content. Read your contracts and create new sounds for the love of music as an expression of who you are. You don't need to compromise for the bag or the glamorized record label deal. We have enough artists like that and doing a great job at it." This was followed up by statements from Patrick and Carnell as well. "Oh, we're going there today? In that case, at Disney needs to run at KelTheFlow88 his check for writing the rap on #HighSchoolMusical, #GetYourHead in the Game. He was 14 and they stole that check from him. I have yet to see any money from what we done. Sad case, not an original story. Parents, protect your children and don't allow the same mistakes to be done." Though a bit vague considering the projects that they dropped with Bad Boy and Disney, we can understand the sentiment of these three statements. But soon the post would be deleted, and to this day the group has never spoken in specifics about the details of their various contracts. For a couple of weeks, Brian's post and delete reignited the conversation around labels and scamming artists, but soon things were business as usual. In early 2020, record labels organized Blackout Tuesday to take a stand against police brutality. It took place on June 2nd, and labels were encouraged to not release any music on this day and to post black squares with #BlackoutTuesday and other pro-Black and Black Lives Matter tags. This was widely criticized for a number of different reasons. People looking for resources or places to donate would primarily see a sea of black squares under important hashtags when on apps like Twitter and Instagram. But most of the criticism called the labels out for performative activism and virtue signaling, as they are the very corporations that exploit Black labor on the largest scale possible. Protests surrounding BLM reignited conversations about racial wealth inequality across the board. In response to the backlash, labels organized donation efforts, and some publicly pondered banning the word urban, shifting the goalpost once again. Now, let's talk about money. But to do that, we have to take a trip from Chicago to New York. Kanye West signed to Rockefeller in 2002. In September of 2020, he posted actual pages from his contract to the internet for our viewing pleasure. Throughout his career, he's been able to renegotiate his contract several times. We won't get into specifics, but I'll give you an overview and relate it to how artists like B5 can be finagled into signing a deal that doesn't benefit them at all. A great resource for information about music industry contracts is Noisy's Unpaid Royalty series on the Vice website. It's excellent. Ye signed an initial and 6-option album deal with Universal Music Group. This means that he signed onto UMG for The College Dropout, his first album, and UMG and Kanye West have the option to extend and renegotiate the contract after each album. So prior to optional album 1, which was Late Registration, they had the option to extend the contract and renegotiate the terms. Throughout his career, Kanye has received over $30 million in advances from his projects and has been able to renegotiate for a larger percentage of royalties and even profit-sharing deals as he progressed in his career. So this started out as a pretty standard royalty deal, which is one of the main types of contracts. So in exchange for their advance, which is a loan that needs to be paid back to the label, the artist makes their album and gives the label their masters. The label takes care of initial costs and keeps a large percentage of money generated by the music. The artist's rate is usually 10 to 25%. The loan that they have to pay back and any recoupable expenses are taken out of that 10 to 25%, while labels take their 75 to 90% off the top. Labels make an average of 0.005 cent per stream, and 10 to 25% gets taken out of that for the artist as well. If the artist wrote or produced a song, they would also get what are called mechanical royalties, which are about 0.000 6 cents, and the label usually caps mechanical royalties at a certain amount. This deal generally does not include tour, sponsor, or merchandise profits. This is standard for new artists because it covers development and marketing. Considering the statements made by B5, I would assume that this is the kind of deal that they had. I will link articles that discuss exactly how Ye's rates and contract intricacies have changed throughout his career because it's too much for me to discuss here, but it's safe to say that Kanye's deal is more than most artists could hope for, even though it's still unfair. So B5 was not getting a deal like this.
About this though, Rodney just, hold on, let's get a look at this car.
Okay, we are, look at that.
That's a Bentley. Yeah,
and that's platinum colored. You see that? It's platinum colored.
Yes, Bentley. Rodney just said, once I sell 10 million records, he's giving that Bentley to me.
Shut up.
On the real.
Since B5 is not as candid as Ye with the details of their contracts, we'll have to use hypotheticals. Let's assume B5 got the best possible standard deal according to the unpaid royalty series. That would mean they get 25% of album royalties after recouping costs and paying back their advance. Let's round up their first album sales to 300,000, and let's assume their second album also sold 300,000 lifetime copies just like their first. According to this article, albums were around 1329 at this time, which means that the physical album sales for both albums account for about $7,974,000. 25% of this would be $1,993,500 for B5, and 75% would be $5,980,500 for Bad Boy. Even if there weren't recoupable expenses, an advance to pay back, managers, agents, tutors, etc., each member would only wind up with about $398,700. Spread that out over the 8 years that they were signed to Bad Boy. That's less than $50,000 a year each, with no expenses, advance, or other payments taken out. This is the best possible scenario. And while these boys were performing all across the country, what they were making off of their music was not enough to sustain them in some of the cities that they were performing in. If you remember what we discussed before, B5 was allegedly stuck in contract renegotiations with Bad Boy for 2 years after the release of their second album. Had they not been, they would have made about $66,450 per year per member. That's still not much, especially for the best possible standard deal. But by keeping them in contract negotiations for so long, Bad Boy effectively decreased their per year and per member earnings. To put their sales in perspective a little bit, they are very similar to Chloe and Halle's charting and sales across their Ungodly Hour album. Now, these two aren't exactly the same, of course. They're in different eras of music and of pop culture and of social media, but this is a pretty close comparison. The main difference being that Chloe and Halle have a Beyonce cosign and B5 had a Diddy cosign. Child stars as a concept has never really made much sense to me because it actively and knowingly puts children in danger. Child labor is illegal unless it's for our enjoyment and entertainment. In the case of B5, they were asked questions about their favorite colors, astrological signs, subjects in school, and what they like in girls and their group and family dynamics. They're pushed to every limit possible, and at such a young age, from learning choreography and honing their singing skills to media training for interactions like this one.
Kind of girl I'm looking for, probably,
An interviewer asking 5 underage boys what they look for in a girlfriend is weird. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Questions like this one and others about their favorite food and stuff is all a part of their image. In addition to seeming talented and relatable, they had to appeal to young girls looking for celebrity boyfriends. It makes sense, but that doesn't make it not strange. In the few statements that they have made, B5 has never come out and said that anything bad happened to them because they were child stars. So I'm not making that accusation. I'm just saying that in an industry that takes advantage of people, mostly Black people, like the music industry, you have to be so cautious when involving your children. B5 seems to have turned out perfectly fine despite being monetarily taken advantage of, but many artists are chewed up and spit out by the music industry machine, and at such a young age, and for many, their careers never recover. This is my editing self chiming in for the last time for this video. I cut a couple of parts from this about Diddy because I didn't want this to be about him specifically for too long, since I think this is an industry-wide thing, and really I think it goes beyond that, but we'll have to have those conversations another time. But I wanted to highlight this one thing before we wrap up. In one of their documentaries, B5 talks about how they spent Christmas with Diddy and his family.
He's the greatest role model that I know. You know, he's got his hands in everything. You know, he's got record label, clothing line, shoes. He does movies and everything. So
that just seems like a sort of generous thing to do for these children who are in the entertainment industry, who are spending a lot of time away from their families, until you look at it within the context of everything else that has happened in their career thus far, especially how their deal with Bad Boy sort of went awry, especially when you look at their story in comparison to other Bad Boy artist stories or other young artists' stories. As you get older, some older relationships fall off, which, you know, is just a part of life, swindle them out of their money and effort. They go out of their way to make them feel amazing and great, but it's like they just go out of their way to love bomb and to create this sort of false sense of closeness, if you will. It happens time and time again, and it's kind of gross when you just think about how artists can feel so close to people on their label only to be like thrown to the side by those same people. I just think it's really ridiculous. All right, let's wrap up. In the 90s, RZA broke the mold, or shackles, of traditional music contracts. After being screwed over in a standard deal by Tommy Boy, he knew too well what it felt like to be shaped to fit a certain image, only to be considered a casualty of war when his initial rise to fame was ruined by the label's carefully crafted image for him. RZA's idea to give Wu-Tang Clan members the ability to sign individual deals while remaining in the group was monumental because it gave the artists the power. In the aforementioned Vice article, it says that it's not hard to see that even contracts that represent industry standard are, from an artist's perspective, inherently unfair, structured around the repayment of an upfront label investment that many artists will be unable to recoup, partly owing to the terms of their agreement itself. The purpose of the music industry is to make as much money as possible while paying as little as possible. It's the capitalist venture. It has affected groups like TLC, New Edition, NWA, and plenty of others tenfold. Despite their visibility, they didn't get to truly reap the benefits of their success at the initial height of their career and had to wait until their second, third, fourth album in order to finally see the benefits of all of this hard work that they were putting in. The audience plays a role as well. People love a redemption arc, but they don't often support artists as much on their journey back to the top. It can be hard to convince people that you're worthy of their time and attention like you were before. No matter how you feel about B5, their resilience is admirable. For 20 years, they stuck by a dream and commitment that they made when many would have given up years ago. These are qualities that you'd want